On behalf of DataXis, I would like to welcome you all to the first edition of Sustainability, Telecom and Media. So I took this opportunity to thank our sponsors, speaker, moderators, and participants for their usual support and participation. So before diving into the panel conference, we'll just have a quick look at today's agenda. So we'll start the conference with the panel Sustainability in Operators and Broadcasters Infrastructure. Then we'll move to another interesting panel on audiovisual production, so implementation of energy efficiency system. Then we'll move to environmental performance in TV broadcasting. So after the lunch break, we'll have a special focus on US with a panel on how can ecological efforts align with business objective. So let us now dive into the first panel session, Sustainability in Operators and Broadcasters Infrastructure. So I have the pleasure to welcome for this session, Catherine Ball from Proximus, Charles-Edouard Mounier from RTL Netherlands, Fiona Ball from Bigger Picture Sky, Rémi Bédouin from ATEM, and Mark Gisbert from Liberty Global. So this panel will be moderated by Dr. Oliver Bach. So Oliver, you now have the floor.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I'm super excited about this session. I'm a British journalist and writer, and I've been banging on about sustainability for most of my career. So 20 years ago, we were writing about tree planting and employee outings to paint the local Cub Scout Center. That's what was considered corporate sustainability or corporate citizenship back in the day. Today, the landscape is completely different. And I'm so excited by the fact that we've moved, awareness has got to the point where people are taking action. We're moving from pledges to action, but 20 years is a long time in terms of our planetary systems. It's not a very long time in planetary systems, let's be honest, but in what we've done in 20 years, the issues have only got more serious. So it's great that action's being taken, but this is an urgent conversation is what I'm trying to have. And it's great that we've got these panelists that are, in the weeds, they're working in the organizations that we're involved in, that we care about, doing stuff to make a difference. So I'm excited interrogating what they're doing, what challenges they're facing. I've asked them all to ground their conversation as much as possible in practical realities and challenges and successes. Remy, you've kindly sponsored this event. Why don't you just kick off, just 30 seconds, tell us what are you hoping to get out of this session?
Thanks, Oliver, and I'm also excited and thrilled to be here with my fellows. So I think that the outcome, and I think this is the same for the fellows, is really to set the ground for a kind of more consciousness around sustainability. Let's face it, our industry is a bit late compared to others when it comes to sustainability. So we need to increase this awareness so that when we build and we enable new services with still some innovation, because we are here to enable innovations, sustainability will be also a factor that will drive this innovation. And so we have to raise this consciousness in our industry. And so this 1 hour discussion and exchange is one step among a bigger picture.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Remy. So awareness raising, we want everyone to kind of know what we're talking about, right? Get the ground rules, but as a spur to innovation, not just so we can sit around the table and discuss this till we're all old, but so we can do stuff in our R&D labs on the ground, making a difference through innovation. Fiona, I was wondering, Sky's a big company, you've got a big picture, you've been involved in this field, leading the way for a long time now. I think you went carbon neutral back in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. Can you just explain, building what Remy said, can you just sort of map out the sustainability landscape for operators and broadcasters. Why is it important? How are we doing? And what are the big challenges that you see for the sector?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just explain. I mean, the bigger picture is our social and environmental impact work at Sky. I've been at Sky for 15 years, looking at environment and sustainability all of that time. So just to set the sustainability landscape, as you said, we've been looking at this for 20 years, and it's it's a long time, but it's not a long time in terms of the climate. But actually things have changed massively in those 20 years of being an environmental sustainability expert. I think possibly until the last 2 or 3 years, businesses have been very much focused around their direct business activities, so what we call the scope 1 and 2s. But in reality, when you have a look at the challenges that we face to stay below 1.5 degrees warming, we need to take into account our whole value chain as a business, as a sector. And this puts it into a very different dimension. I mean, for Sky, when you look at our whole value chain, actually that includes scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. And I'll just explain that in a little bit. But our scope 3 emissions, which are the emissions that are associated with all of the suppliers that we have in our supply chain to produce a service. We have about 11,000 suppliers worldwide. And the use of our products in our customer homes. When you look at that, that actually isn't 97% of the overall footprint. So what we've been focusing on for probably the last 15 years, the first 15 years, which is what our carbon neutrality looks at, is only 3% of the big issue that we need to face. So when we try and look at kind of putting it into this sustainability into the landscape, things have changed. We need to now, as an industry, have a look across our whole value chain, and we need to set what we call science-based targets in order to look at how we, in absolute terms, reduce our footprint across those 3 scopes in the next 10 years by at least half, by 50%, in order to stay below 1.5 degrees warming. That's the big challenge that we've got ahead of us. Now, we've set our target to be net zero carbon by 2030. So that includes a commitment to halve our footprint in the next 10 years. But then we've also made a commitment that the remaining emissions at that stage, because we'll continue to reduce it along the science, will start offsetting in natural carbon sinks that absorb the remaining emissions, so we become net zero. And that's slightly different also from carbon neutrality, which looks at more general offsetting. The key, I think, also for broadcasters, and what's really interesting for our industry is, as well as we're looking at ways that we reduce our footprint across those scopes, we have a massive opportunity to influence others, whether that's using our voice and our platforms to influence the public and our consumers and our customers, and supporting them in their transition to a net zero world, or whether that's actually mobilizing other businesses in our supply chain. So the majority of us will have a big footprint in our supply chain. Possibly a lot of them will be very similar suppliers that we all work with day to day, especially when you look at streaming, cloud, technology, data centers. We're all working with the same suppliers. And that's a big part of it, is how do we come together as an industry to work with those suppliers and to work together to reduce the footprint. Yeah. So hopefully that puts it into a little bit of the landscape and the challenge, but the positive opportunities that we have facing us, really. Yeah,
no, super helpful. Thank you so much. Just to get a feel from the panel, when Fiona's saying 97% of their emissions are in scope 3 amongst their supply chain, the wider value chain, does that echo with other people? Are you sort of over 50%, or are you actually one of the suppliers? So who's over sort of 60, 70, 80?
Well, we're actually at 96% also. We're looking 96. At the scope 3, which is 96%, but it all depends a bit on when you started, as Fiona said, when you started working on your own emissions. Because when you started working on your own emissions quite some time ago, your scope 1 and 2 has already decreased, hence why that scope 3 is then the biggest chunk left, where operators or broadcasters or whoever is only starting to work on their scope 1 and 2, they will still have a different view on that one. We see a lot of differences there also between operators still.
Yeah. And so, Catherine, just because I gathered Proximus, you launched a strategy back in 2019 with
Well, we started working on sustainability in 2009, and we updated and we integrated it as an integral part of our strategy in 2020. In terms of ambitions, well, we're carbon neutral since 2016 ourselves. A bit later than Sky there. The biggest challenge is indeed in the value chain. We've got an ambition of net zero 2040, but without offsetting. So we are not going to, looking at how well, the most recent announcements of SBTi in terms of what is going to take to be able to call it net zero, that is going to be announced in about 9 days. So we'll know by then what we can and cannot do. But the ambition for us is set on 2040, just because of the fact that we are not such a huge operator. We're still in Belgium, a smaller country. So in terms of investments, if you want to offset, you need to invest a lot in carbon removal strategies, which is where we are looking into how we can really reduce through our suppliers the most of it there.
Brilliant. I'm conscious, I don't want to over jargon our listeners. So we're talking SBTi, Science-Based Targets Initiative, scopes 1, 2, 3. This is your direct impacts through to your value chain impacts. Just Catherine, Mike, just one follow-up question. Maybe some listeners are thinking, well, this is all quite new to us. We know we need a strategy. Where do you start? What advice would you pass on? Fiona mentioned the importance of targets and setting metrics. Is that top of the list? Is that what you do after you decide your principles? How does just...
Well, I think the first step is trying to understand what your footprint looks like in trying to measure what your footprint is. Once you know what it is and where it is situated, which is still for a lot of people a big challenge to measure that scope 3 really. Then it's setting targets and trying to especially on scope 3 get as right as you can be, because a lot of it is still best effort approach, because we're not using direct data from our suppliers for everything, for every supplier that we have. So I think setting the baseline is probably the first step that you need to take, and then setting realistic targets first on your own emissions, and then of course in the value chain there too.
Yeah. Mark, I think coming to that point of sort of finding a baseline, working out where you stand, what your performance is, so you know where you need to get to. Am I right in understanding that you've gone through that similar sort of process? You work with a consultancy firm, KPMG, was it? Maybe I've got that wrong, but if you've had experience in this field, tell us how it worked, what you did. Yeah.
Just to echo what Catherine was saying earlier, I think it really starts with a good understanding of the entire chain and where you can make the most impact. But certainly also along the way, making sure that you, for every new initiative, really follow a very strict, in our case, for instance, a scorecard to benchmark. How does this contribute to achieving that goal in the long run? So in our case, that means that our product sustainability scorecard that we built is really a comprehensive set of measurements to really, before we even start a new initiative or make a new investment or develop a new product for that matter, look at the environmental and social impact that it will generate, and of course then which part of that, both ourselves, both suppliers, and ultimately consumers, what can you impact and what can you control, and ultimately lead up to exactly the same goal, but be ruthless and be super consistent along the way.
And that means you say like our product scorecard is visits, it's something you can do at breakfast. How do you even start with that process? I mean, this is quite complicated. Do you do it in-house? Do you get people to help you? How does that actually work?
So yeah, it's a largely developed in-house solution, but indeed with some consulting help. It's something we created in 2014. It's called the Product Sustainability Scorecard, and it's basically a measurement system with over 80 questions that you ask yourselves as an organization. Like I said, for every aspect of every new innovation or service or product that you put out there, or investment you make in your plant or in your infrastructure, and then to look at all those things like the resource consumption, water use, the energy needed to generate power to actually run the service, for instance. And then on all those counts, look at where can we contribute to actually ultimately achieving the goals that we set ourselves, but also how can we make sure that the suppliers that we work with to supply us with the parts that are needed to make that product or to provide that service do exactly the same.
Yeah.
And we've been consistently using that for the last 7 years.
I'm keen to talk about the kind of innovation piece, but keeping at the sort of starting strategy point, it's been mentioned several times, this importance of getting suppliers on side. That's where our impacts are. We need them to start acting as well to help us realize our environmental objectives. Perhaps someone, maybe Remy or Charlotte, if you're on do you have experience of being on the supplier side, and how does that relationship work? Does it oh gosh, these guys are sending us yet another questionnaire, or is it an opportunity for you, do you see, to offer more environmental solutions that might make you a preferred supplier? Or how does that dynamic work between client and supplier?
So Charlotte, if you don't mind, I will take it, because I think I'm the only supplier in this forum. So yeah, at TEM, we are a supplier to the likes of Sky, Liberty Global, Proximus, and RTL. So we are here to help these companies power new services, new innovation. Again, to be honest, when we look at the past few years, the sustainability topic was maybe a line 5 years ago, now a section 2 to 3 years ago. Now it's becoming a major request in the request for proposal from our customers. It's not yet the major impact. People are still looking at the technology performances, at the price, and so on. I have to say that actually, from our standpoint, the question of sustainability was there even before being present, because 5 to 10 years ago, our customers were asking for high performance. High performance is, I want to increase my density of processing. I want to reduce my power consumption. 5 years ago, it was really from a pure cost perspective. I have to reduce my bill. I have to reduce my investments. I want to optimize my operation. Now, these same performance are pivoting, and I consider from the sustainability perspective. What can you do at TEM as a supplier to help me in my scope 1 and 2? I have to reduce my emission for my own service. I have to optimize my real estate. I have to provide a better choice for my end user so that they can choose between resolution 1 and resolution 2, so that I can lead to less resources. So this is what we are seeing these days.
And is the onus on you to deliver those innovations and answer those questions in a way that's positive, or do you get support to develop solutions, either from the client saying, we need answers, can you help, let's do it together, or do you look to government, or do you look to your own R&D to provide the kind of solutions that are being requested?
It's rather, let's say, on our side to provide the solution, and what we see that the requirement from the customer side is increasing. So it's I would say a virtuous circle for the moment, where we provide better performing solution, reducing the carbon impact, and there is an ever increasing interest on our customer side to provide even more. So it's an increasing balance, if I may say.
Yeah, maybe we could get the buyer's perspective on this relationship. When it comes to innovation, you're looking for answers in your value chain, as you don't just want problems, you want answers from them. What's the best way of discovering them, of finding the solutions that you need? How does it work in practice? You put a tender out, or do you have a list of preferred suppliers because of, they're good at this? How does it work in practice? Maybe Charles-Edouard, you could give us your perspective.
Yeah, maybe. So just I want to say that I recognize a lot of stuff that has been said so far. For example, about the Scope 3 emissions. When we started to work on sustainability and our carbon footprint, we were a bit surprised with the first insights. And indeed, for us as well, more than 95% of the CO2 emissions are from the Scope 3 and coming from other partners we work with. So that's really great to have this kind of panel and to be able to exchange with all the people and other companies we work with in this big value chain. And for us, the two main sources of emission when we did the first carbon footprint audit were, on one side, all emissions coming from the content production, because we are broadcasters and we also have, of course, digital OTT activities, but we produce content and we buy content. And so about 2/3 of our emissions were coming from this specific domain, content production. So, and this is where we have to work with a lot of different partners. So this is very important to create awareness and to connect and to interconnect with those people, different small or bigger production company, to work together on how to measure at a granular level each production, for example, because monitoring and understand where the emissions are coming from, it's very key to start having a proper strategy and a proper plan.
I just wonder where the incentive piece is, because it can feel like a burden. You know, this is RTL, they're nagging on at me again about the carbon emissions of our latest broadcast. We'll have to meet their requirements, just do this and this. But how do you have that conversation that inspires a kind of, you've raised awareness, but how do you get beyond that to kind of, like, we really want to do this, not just to keep the contract, but because it's the right thing to do. I'm trying to understand how it moves from, because I understand that on the ad side that you actually have cut out some ad providers that don't take this seriously. So that's one way you can use the stick and say, meet our requirements or you're out. But how about the carrot? What's that look like when it comes to innovation? Has anyone got some insights on your own experience of what's worked well with that supplier dynamic? Fiona, and then Catherine.
So I mean, how we look at it is that we chunk it up in, so we don't take the same approach for all of our suppliers. Yes, we include things in our RFI, but when we actually have a look at our value chain emissions, 80% of our carbon footprint from our suppliers comes from about 300 of those suppliers. And that's when you start getting into, so how are we going to work together where there's going to be collaboration and there's going to be benefit from both parties to have this conversation. And then the majority of those large carbon emissions are actually from our product supply chain, for example. So the people that make our products, the manufacturers. And with those, because we've identified that they're really key as part of our value chain to reduce emissions, we then work with them to look at ways that we can reduce the footprint there. So across all of our products, we do something called a life cycle assessment. So we do an assessment of the design, the manufacture, the materials that are used, the use, and we identify where the biggest carbon hotspots are. And it could be in the manufacturing sites, for example. And we will work with our suppliers then to look at energy efficiency audits of our manufacturing sites and build a business case, because obviously if we make improvements in energy efficiency or look at on-site renewables that we can invest and jointly invest on those sites, then they will be saving money as well. So what we do is try to focus it down a little bit into a funnel. You know, who are the suppliers that we need to work with, who've got the biggest carbon footprint, and then how do we work with them to have, you know, both benefit from the overall process. And
just before we move on to Catherine, can you clarify with me an example of how do you do that, build the business case with the supplier? I mean, do you literally go in and work through the numbers with them, or do you ask them to come back and you have a sort of to and fro? How does it actually work?
No, we've actually gone in and worked through the numbers with them. So we've helped finding local consultants that are there that can go on site, can do energy efficiency audits, build a case of what can be achieved in terms of energy efficiency or on-site renewables, build the business case and have a look what the payback is. For us, it's a really big thing. Our product supply chain is a massive part of it. But I just want to also, because I know there was a question in around the data gathering piece, because this is really complicated trying to work out your footprint across your scope 3 emissions, and it's not easy. And as Catherine said, some of that data is primary data. So with our product supply chain, we ask and work with them to get primary data. Some of it's, from carbon disclosure project, CDP data. So we have published on our website the methodology and the calculations and and how we went about it, so that we hope that that can be used by others to see, because it is very complicated. And
maybe you could put the link in the chat so we can all go and do our homework. Catherine, on this innovation piece, you had some insights.
Well, it's actually, I'm not going to repeat myself, because a lot of it is similar to what Fiona said. We also, for us, it's about 50% of our scope 3, which is linked to 15 suppliers only. So meaning but there's very different types of maturity within those suppliers. You've got the ones who have set themselves targets, but we also have, we're rolling out a new network, which also means that we use local subcontractors to do the digging, which is they end up in our scope 3, but they haven't heard anything about a footprint yet. So you approach them very differently. With the ones like Fiona said, also where we have products that we put ourselves into the market, we really go also into a collaborative approach. We also do life cycle assessment with them. And assess where they can really improve, and that is being assessed from every version of the product that we have. Actually, we try to make it better and more efficient on energy side, and also less cumbersome towards the planet. If I think about innovation, where you say, well, what about innovation? I think then I need to look into what we are doing with the network, because with the network we need to roll out a full new network since we cannot use Huawei anymore in Belgium. So we've chosen to work together with Nokia and Ericsson on that one, and we really go into a collaborative approach where we try to see by using AI, advanced analytics, in terms of how can we make certain sites, because of a certain configuration, more energy efficient. How do we balance the different spectra that we have running on, for instance, the mobile network. So there's a lot of collaboration which is being done in we call it pre-production work before we start rolling out the network. And we see that there's a lot of traction on it too. There's some very good insights also coming from universities on that level. So innovation is there, and it's mostly through really analyzing data that you have and trying to mirror also what could be a future situation by using AI there. So that's a bit the biggest chunk of innovation that we see happening to make it more carbon friendly.
Yeah, brilliant. So the messages I'm getting are that, first off, identify, measure what your baseline is, then prioritize where the big emissions or impacts are happening, and focus in on those, and engage and collaborate, and find incentives to help people provide the solutions you're looking for. So I've got a question about innovation in the system, because a lot of these issues you'll come across are related to how power is made, or how the networks work, or how the data centers operate. They're questions that, however big your companies are, fall outside your immediate influence. How do you go about creating change at that sort for your sector, at those system problems which you're a part of, but you can't get on the phone to someone and say fix this? So how do you go about creating an ecosystem that is beneficial for everyone, that's going to solve the generic impacts related to energy, related to transport, whatever they might be? Catherine, again, if you've got an answer.
Well, no, the only thing, I think the key word is collaboration. We work together with industry associations. We work together with several other operators also in trying to find solutions to the problem, by using innovation, but also by just being able to jointly make that request towards the people that we don't control ourselves immediately.
Has anyone got some examples of take data. I was amazed that data centers, I read, could be as much as 3.2% of global emissions by 2025 if we carry on streaming in the way that we're doing. But has anyone seen innovation in that space? Have you been involved in conversations, or do you see hope there? And if not in data centers, another sort of big problem, macro problem that you've been able to chip away at through innovation. A kind of example that would give us hope and maybe some advice on how to approach these issues would be super helpful. Mark.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure if my answer will give you enough hope, Oliver, but I can surely relate to what you're saying. First echoing what Catherine was saying, it is very much about collaboration across the chain. So make sure you surround yourself with the parties that dare to push the envelope and dare to come up with innovative ideas. Also, try and test out a lot of solutions, right? Not everything might work, or sometimes simple solutions might work unexpectedly well, as we've also seen in some cases. Specifically on your point about data centers, what we have seen ourselves is that even with something as simple as the use of free air cooling, literally using air cooling rather than certain types of refrigerants in complex solutions, we're able to achieve as much as 40% energy reduction in those cases. Now, it relies a lot, of course, on the temperature outside also being at a certain level, but that's a very simple solution. It does require some innovation. It does require some investment, but it can lead to significant energy reduction. If you look at data centers overall, there are of course also things like increased use of solar power, maybe even more complex solutions like immersive cooling for equipment, etc. But even also in the case where Liberty Global does play a role through its Atlas Edge joint venture, maybe through the use of edge computing, literally leading to a more efficient travel of data across the network and bringing the actual generation of data closer to an end user. It's small things and it's small parts of the total chain, but it's innovations like those across the chain that can actually lead to a different energy consumption pattern overall, for sure.
Brilliant. Is that edge computing, is that the data compression work that you've been doing?
No, that's the edge computing is literally bringing the compute and store closer to the end user or the end customer, right? So rather than relying mostly on centralized solutions, it actually literally calls for a different network topology. So
there are simple solutions, quick wins, and perhaps you don't have to solve the whole thing in one go. Multiple innovations can get us to where we need to get to. Remy, you had your
one thing, by the way, you mentioned data compression. I'm sure some of the other folks on the call will have even more experience with that or similar experience with that. Some over-the-top or on-demand providers themselves have also been very active. Netflix is an example, a good example where years ago they already invested themselves in more efficient data compression technology because they also wanted to make sure that they can reach mobile subscribers more efficiently, which for them is a huge saver because they have to invest less in capacity. For the industry as a whole, that's a great innovation because it leads to more efficient transfer of data, right? So it can come really from all sides across the chain.
Brilliant.
On my side, so multiple points I would like to highlight. First, getting back to the data center point that you rose, Oliver. When we look at that, there are various technologies and innovation that cloud providers are bringing to this ecosystem. So Mark mentioned about how we could use air. We could discuss also about water preservation and how we could reuse water in order not to use air conditioning to get down the temperature. There are also how you manage your outbound environment, local circuits, how you manage the repair and so on. Eventually, when you look at the cloud providers or the data centers provider page, they use one indicator called PUE, Power Usage Effectiveness, which is a global system to rank how green or how sustainable the data center is. So power consumption and everything around the environment can be measured from that standpoint. And so the innovation can be measured from that standpoint. The other point, which is really back to the ATEM DNA and ATEM business. Yes, data compression and how you optimize data compression, video compression, is an essential part to reduce scope 1 and 2 when it comes to TV and streaming service. And so there are plenty of things that you can do, not only to reduce the bitrate, but also provide a better selection between different profile, so that you can still reach customers, but instead of needing 10, 15 megabits because it's a new HD 4K profile, or because you have multiple profiles, then you can select one or two ladder, and so send this ladder only to Fiona or only to Catherine. And so not only you reduce the usage of hardware resources, because the less bitrate, the less hardware resources, but also that's the same for storage, that's the same for streaming. Eventually, if we can streamline the compression and the delivery of video to the end user, we use less hardware resources, hence we reduce the carbon footprint.
Brilliant, thank you. Charles-Edouard, you had a point. I'm keen to move on to away from the macro, more onto the consumer piece. But
just maybe one last point, because we talk a lot about innovation, from how to improve and optimize the tech infrastructure, the data servers, the working on the edge computing, for example. But on our side, I mean, one of the first low-hanging fruit is also to work on the type of energy that we use. And that's what we asked also to our tech partners, because as a broadcaster, we are more a tech customer and tech client than a supplier. So when working with our CDN or cloud provider, make sure that they work with green energy. It's for us the easiest way to decrease our carbon footprint. That's what we did on the advertising technology side. We used to work with an SSP provider using gray energy, and just by changing to another one using green energy, of course, our scope 3 emissions reduced by thousands of tons of CO2. So from a broadcaster perspective, that's very important to work with suppliers that are using green energy. That's really the low-hanging fruit.
Catherine, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, well, I fully agree that getting towards green energy is a major driver to get your scope 2 down. But still, there's 50 shades of green in that energy market, where it's incredibly difficult to really, well, you can move towards it, but really going the whole way where you know where you're increasing your hourly matching ratio, and that you're using and producing that green energy very local, that's not as an easy task as just saying that you're buying green energy there.
Yeah, I'm keen to move to the consumer piece, but before I do, I'm looking at some of the questions that's coming through. You said there's 50 shades of green when it comes to renewables. There's also 50 shades of green when it comes to achieving net zero, especially through offsetting. You're all offsetting? Yes, in some manner or other? No? So Fiona, you mentioned offsetting as part of your strategy. Are you confident that these offsetting projects are delivering what you want them to deliver? Are they an answer? Are they a temporary answer? Or how do they fit in the mix?
Yeah, so don't get me wrong, the offsetting is an addition to what we need to do in terms of net zero carbon and what the Science Based Target Initiative do. So our ultimate thing is to reduce our footprint by 50% in the next 10 years. And then that will continue. So by 2035, I think it's 67%. By 2040, it's 80%. By 2050, it's zero. That is by absolute reductions. And the offsetting piece, and I don't really well, the offsetting piece is to move faster to be net zero by 2030, in addition to reducing your footprint in line with the science that we need to stay below 1.5 degrees. What can we do now as well? And so we can look at how we can absorb the remaining emissions that we still do have at that point to be net zero. But that's not just in any offsets, that's in offsets that the Science Based Target Initiative will come out as part of their review in 9 days' time. It will be around investments in nature that absorb the remaining emissions, so new reforestation nature, or it will be carbon capture and storage. It will be, which is very different from kind of offsets that are available at the moment around voluntary carbon standard offsets that reduce emissions elsewhere. So, so yeah, it is an addition to it. It's so we move as fast as we can, but it does not take away the fact that we've made commitments to halve our footprint.
Okay, and we do have another question related, and that's even if it's temporary, even if it's a way of just getting to net zero, in that process, how do we avoid challenges of greenwashing? How can we, flip the question? How do we know they're credible?
Yeah, so I think the question that came out was if you're kind of outsourcing into scope 3 of emissions, then how can that be kind of greenwashing? But I think it's completely the other way in terms of when you're looking at net zero, you're talking about the emissions associated with everything across the scopes, which includes all of the services that you have outsourced into your supply chain, which is a very different approach when previously we've just had a look at our direct emissions, because when we have to, as part of net zero, take into account all of the indirect emissions, all of the suppliers, all of the outsourcing, which prevents greenwash, I think, because you're accounting for them and you have to account for them. So this is, you have to work with your suppliers to collaboratively reduce the emissions. You're not outsourcing those emissions. They are part of your footprint.
Yeah. Remy said at the beginning, one of his hopes was that this discussion and discussions like this will raise awareness within the industry. I know we're talking about infrastructure and operational impacts primarily today, but given that we've got some broadcasters on the call, I mean, when it comes to raising awareness, you're almost uniquely positioned to get word out there, to inspire both your suppliers, but also your wider consumers, the wider public. How intrinsic is that to your kind of environmental strategy? To what extent do you have a responsibility to help teenagers who happen to be on your telephone or seeing their favorite soap, kind of start thinking about green issues and what they can do, and tell us a bit about the sort of behavioral change vision that you have from the broadcasters on the line. Would be fascinating.
Yeah, definitely it's on the roadmap, but I must say that it's not the first step. We have started to work on this sustainability program for now 18 months. And of course, we have a role in the society, and we have at some point to embed more the sustainability topic in our content, in our stories. But before doing that, we also want to work on our own footprint, because if you start telling people, and you always have to avoid shaming people, but if we start saying everywhere on all our content that you guys have to decrease your own personal carbon footprint, etc., but if on our own side we don't clean our own emissions, that's kind of risky. So it's a parallel effort, of course, but we are now really focused on decreasing our footprint. And in 2022, we will start embedding that. So it's a very different work between decreasing your own emissions, working with your suppliers on a carbon intensity and energy intensity. It's a total different work than working with your creative team on how putting more carpooling or solar panel stories in your content.
No, and I understand that reticence to come out and start speaking before your own house is in order, but it's good to have a solid date, 2022, when you will start on that journey, because no one's ever going to be perfect, right? You're never ever going to be getting it. If we go digging around your companies, we'll find problems. So it can't be.
It's in the roadmap. It's in the roadmap, and definitely we will address that and find a way, step by step, to create awareness in the creative team, working also with the production company we work with to develop great stories. Definitely.
Lots of hands going up. Thank you, Charles. Edward. One thing you said is we don't go telling people. Maybe those with their hands up, some reflection on how you actually do this, how you get the message across in a way that's engaging and not shaming, to use Charles Edward's word. Yeah, Catherine.
Well, I think what we've tried to do is to create awareness across our touch points in terms of making sure that they understand what the impact is, the choices that they can make, giving tips and tricks on how they can do it differently, how the consumer in that respect can do it differently. And I think one of the things, well, we've launched together with the local Belgian bank, we launched about a week ago, we launched the neobank, and one of the features in there is that it gives it has a CO2 dashboard in it, so it gives an ID. It's not perfect, not at all, but it gives an idea of the footprint that you have just by your buying behavior through your bank account. So it's one of the things that we will be pushing further in our own value propositions, also in terms of really getting to that knowledge so that people just understand already how they can impact. By making a choice A or a choice B, they can do whatever they want, but just by giving them the understanding of, if you do this, then you have that as impact. If you do that, you have that as impact. And that is something that we're trying to roll out a bit across the different services there.
Wow. And it's only a week old, but how's that landed?
Well, how's it landed? I started using it myself, and it's quite impressive to see that it's together with Doconomy, which is a Swedish company, and they use the Öland index, which has a lot of I don't know how many millions of products which are sitting in there, and which they have a tag onto it. And the dashboard actually shows you, according to the different product groups, what your impact is, and then it gives you also tips and tricks. There's a sort of gamification in there too, in which you're getting points if you do if you behave properly, to call it like that. And you could also, it's included with, once the loyalty is then linked to supporting some biodiversity projects there. Great.
Remy and Fiona both got your hands up. Remy, why don't you jump in? I think you're doing some interesting stuff on this SDHD option. If you could feed that in, that'd be amazing. I'd love to know more about that.
I would like also to react to what Catherine and Charlotte was saying. It is true that at some point we are a bit in a schizophrenic approach where we want to be green, we have to be green before asking our own customers to be green. And whatever we are, a supplier or a D2C supplier, it's a bit schizophrenic. Still, it's better to raise the green awareness in our customer base rather than not doing anything. And Catherine was mentioning the bank. Outside our industry, we can look at the biggest fund investing into green energy. So you have major European banks, they invest billions and billions, but in the meantime, they consume a lot of carbon. So it's a bit schizophrenic, yet it's better to have this approach rather than nothing. That's my view. And this is why, for instance, the Proximus initiative is a great one, because at least we can propose something and we can raise the awareness. Getting back to our industry, and again, just to show a bit not the immaturity, but the delay that we have. So I'm a subscriber to an OTT service where I'm based in France. And so I can decide to go from one resolution to another resolution, and I can force that. So I can ask my OTT provider to send me only simple resolution stream or HD instead of 4K. But to do that, I have to go into parameters, advanced configuration, green service, and then only then I have one parameter. Okay, if you want to save a bit of carbon footprint, then please select SD instead of HD. So that's my business. So I know what I'm doing. I don't think that my mother or my grandmother will understand that. And so I don't know. I think this is where there is a delay, because this sustainability should be one of the first questions raised to the end user. You can help reducing the carbon footprint. And when you look at all the efforts that we are doing, the individual person for the plastic, for the waste, for the local circuit, this is where the streaming industry could do a better job.
Yeah. Fiona, thank you, Remy.
So I totally agree. I think, broadcasters have a responsibility, if not an opportunity, also to engage with consumers around climate change. I think, we have a responsibility to raise the awareness and the understanding of everybody to such a point that we'll have a tipping point of policy changes, government changes, legislation that is needed so that we all as businesses have a level playing field in which to operate, and we all move much faster. We are using, it's part of our key strategy. We've got a strategy on business transformation, and we are transforming our business at the same time. So we've reduced our footprint in our direct business by 27% in 2 years, in our scope 3 value chain by 5% in the last 2 years. So we're doing that, and that's a must. But the other opportunity is using our content and our what we broadcast to engage different audiences. But when you do this, you have to do it through what people are passionate about, because not everybody is passionate about sustainability, carbon, the environment. And you have to do it through what they're interested in, so that you'll engage with them and you will change behaviours. So we've got lots of different programs that we do across all of our different genres to engage people in different ways. So we've got the daily climate show for Sky News, which looks and addresses it as part of mainstream media and news, looking at the issue. We're working really closely with our Sky Sports channel, looking at how we can incorporate it within. We've just had a net zero carbon game, looking at football.
I know, Spurs.
Yes, exactly. Spurs and Chelsea, which was great, and that had a big impact with the people that came and watched the game. We increased by 56% the amount of people that chose to have vegan or plant-based food at the game. That had a big impact. And also, we've done documentaries on the impact of climate change on cricket, for example, and how they're doing it. So. And then in addition to that, we're looking at, with our Sky Kids channels, for example, how do we talk to kids and the younger generation around climate change? So for us, it is an important part of what our opportunity is to engage our audiences. But it has to be done right. It has to be done through what people
and out of interest,
are passionate about.
Yeah. How does it work when it comes to devising the program? Do you have a sort of the consultant that goes around each broadcasting team saying, I think you could develop a storyline here? Or do you give guidelines to the team that are producing the content and your other providers? This is what we'd like to see. How do you actually sort of drip feed this stuff in and get the ideas flowing?
So it has to be owned by those areas of the business. I can't tell commissioning editors or the editorial teams or Sky Sports teams how you incorporate it. It has to make sense to them. Otherwise, you'll turn people off the issue. All of our commissioning editors, our production teams have all gone through carbon training, and it's not just about carbon, because I know there was a question also in the Q&A. It is about broader sustainability. So you have to look at the just transition to a net zero carbon world. So it includes carbon, but it also includes other environmental issues and also social issues and human rights issues as part of that, and that has to be addressed, definitely. So you give them the training that they need, and then they have the conversations. We've got something called a planet test, which is a conversation that we have with all of our commissioning editors and editing teams of when we're looking at producing a piece of content, how do we incorporate it in a way that makes sense to the audience? Yeah. Brilliant.
Lots of hands up. Mark, we haven't heard from you for a while. Jump in.
Yeah, thanks. Just maybe briefly add to the previous speakers, I would argue also, if you look at it from the perspective of an infrastructure provider, or the provider of broadband and TV, for that matter, not just the content itself is an opportunity, as we've heard, to also reach the audience, but I would argue that every step of the way in providing that service, I think the industry has a responsibility to use those touch points to educate consumers and businesses and to take them along on the journey. Luckily, new services on the horizon, like with Smart Home and Smart City, there's an opportunity to actually bake the energy saving and awareness maybe into the service itself as a capability, i.e. providing customers with the tools as part of their smart home service that you offer inside dashboards or apps that they use, etc., to get some awareness about the energy that they use. It used to be not so sexy, right? Everyone has been able to track energy consumption dashboards from their energy provider for years, but who looks at those dashboards all day long? Probably nobody does. Well, only a select Few do, but if you actually make it part of the service you provide, I heard great examples being mentioned like gamification, etc. That's when it becomes to become a really different story. Bizarrely, maybe with the rising energy prices, also in so many countries, there's an additional extra reason for consumers to really worry and to be alert, right? Rather than just caring about the environment and about next generations. So
one follow-up question, Mark, in my mind, it came from what Remy was saying about the option to have standard SD rather than HD because it's more environmentally friendly. Are we getting to a point where we're going to have to ask consumers to choose between the quality of what they're getting, the speed of the Wi-Fi and the efficiency of the service and or the environmental impacts of the service? And how realistic is that? It feels like we if we can't provide optimum service and optimum ecological performance, perhaps we ought to be choosing the ecological performance rather than the optimum service, because this is urgent.
That's a very fair point. Probably we still need to continue to do both, i.e. provide energy saver modes, etc. in all of our equipment when it comes to physical devices, for instance, that we still need to provide customers with to use our services, set-top boxes, modems, routers, and those devices. So certainly on that side, yes, we'll continue to offer those modes and settings and services that allow customers to reduce their energy use. I'm more with you on the other part where, in terms of, we have to, as an industry, figure out a way to actually provide those services and to distribute the content and to allow data to be transported across the network in a way that's as efficient as possible. So the onus on that part, I think, should be more on the industry than on a consumer, because it's a bit weird to me as a product marketeer to have to say, please enjoy our content in 4K, but do enjoy it responsibly. I mean, that's a very tough balance to reach, right? So
thank you. We just had, Charlotte, I'm keen to bring you in. We've just had a question on the chat, which is related. I've put all this R&D into producing a more efficient product. For now, because of scaling problems and efficiency, it's come out a bit more expensive. Can you ask your client to pick up that bill or to get passed on to the consumer? How's that conversation happen when an innovation, because it's early, it's incipient, is going to be more expensive? Charlotte, well, I don't know if you have a view on that, but you were going to say something. If you felt like commenting, anyone else, jump in.
I can do both. Just a first quick answer about the question. It can be more expensive indeed, but I think at some point we are ready to take some hit and to absorb some extra costs, because on the other side, we definitely see value in working on that and to, on the short term and mid term, and of course long term, create more green products. We are a customer facing company, and working on sustainability definitely is also a way to create value and to attract more customers and to attract more other type of clients that we have. It's the advertisers, so that's a combination of these two sides of the story. And so if I come back to the other point that I want to highlight, is that we talk about how to create awareness with our clients, but as a broadcaster, we have, as I said, two types of clients: the end users, the people who watch our shows, but also our clients, it's the advertisers. And we have in this panel people from the telco domain, from the tech services environment, but maybe we are missing the advertisers that are very important in the whole value chain. And what we are going to do from 2022 on that side is to show the efforts we are doing and to engage with advertisers on this key and strategic topic, is that we're going to offer and start having a fully carbon neutral inventory. So when we talk and engage with advertisers, we will be able to ensure that making an inventories, buying marketing budget with us is carbon neutral. So that's also very important as a broadcaster to address the two types of customers that we have.
Yeah, I'm conscious Remy and Catherine want to jump in. Time's ticking away. Again, me with a side, do make your points, but a side question is around certification. You mentioned, you want to work with advertisers. It'd be super helpful if there was a list of certified advertisers that, could show they took this seriously, or broadcast content providers that could do the same. I don't know if it exists. I don't know if it'd be helpful, but perhaps someone's got an observation on that. But Remy, jump in, and then Catherine, if you could keep it short because time's running out.
Sure. Two comments. First, I think that at least for scope 1 and 2, and I know it's not the vast majority, there is a direct correlation between the price of the solution, the performance of it, and the sustainability. At some point, if your dentist is free, you won't go to this dentist. So you will know that you will pay for quality. You will pay for quality means also the performance. And so a performance solution could lead to lower carbon footprint. So that's how we see. Secondly, to answer one of your previous remarks, in the coming years, that will be the difference between a good supplier and a bad supplier. Meaning, how can you ensure good performances, so still enabling the resolution, the experience, and so on, but while decreasing the sustainability. And so that will be what a good supplier could do. A bad supplier will talk only about sustainability or only about the performance.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Remy. Catherine.
Okay. Yeah, maybe very quickly as a last comment, I think in terms of being more expensive, I think if you look at it, if you look at the full life cycle, you often will find that even if it is more expensive from an innovation point of view at the beginning, that over the full life cycle, it's not the case.
Okay. I'm slightly distracted there because
reducing carbon. Hello?
Yeah, you're coming in now. I thought you'd stopped. Carry on. I think you're using a high ecological, low quality Wi-Fi.
No, so actually you find that, well, carbon reduction is also often linked to circular initiatives. And when you look into the circular initiatives, although at the beginning it might be more expensive, if you look at over the full life cycle, it's not the case anymore. And so circularity is also pushing forward both carbon, but it also has some cost benefits linked to it. In terms of, now the second question in terms of certification, well, I think the fact that SBTi is going to give clear directions on what can you say and what you cannot say, being then SBTi, your targets being validated by SBTi will have an influence. You can subscribe to RE100 also. You can be certified by RE100 if you want to go for the 100% green electricity part. There's several others out there, but I think the SBTi now with clear standards is going to be the most important one.
Brilliant. Fiona shared a link, that certification question. Charlotte, well, if you want to go and find ADASOC, then I think you'll find a list of certified providers there. My one job, as well as stop you fighting, which is easy because you're not in the same room, is to make sure we finish on time. So we've got, I think, 2.5 minutes. I just wanted to finish with giving our listeners a degree of hope or ambition. Something to look forward to. We talked quite a lot about the problems and the solutions that you've been providing to those. But if you had a blank board and you could write the one moonshot thing that you wanted to happen, you felt would make a difference for the operators and broadcasters infrastructure sector, what would it be? Magic wand, what would you do? Soundbite time.
I think that collaboration and alignment between all of us, all along the value chain is the key thing that we have to work on. And I have the feeling that this is what is going to happen now. So I'm really glad to see all those efforts and that we are all in a way committed to invest, because that's an investment in terms of time, energy, cost. So we are all willing to invest in that area. So that's to me quite positive.
We've ended up, Remy, where you started, I think. The kind of awareness that we need to do this together. It's important to do it, and we need to do it together.
Yeah, absolutely. My point was about really the awareness, and Shazeba was perfectly right about the collaboration. It's a pivotal mindset. We have to change. It's not a question of getting back to the Middle Age. It's the question, okay, we will continue the innovation. We will try to continue our business just in a better way. And in our better way, the individual layer and the business layer.
Brilliant. Mark.
Well, you
leave us on a high.
You started with a magic wand, Oliver. To paraphrase the previous speakers, I think it's time and there's an opportunity to make magic together, because it is very much about working together across the chain to achieve those ambitious targets that we have. We can do it. We do need to work together, but you have to be ruthless and consistent in in your ambition to work together with like-minded partners to achieve that.
Brilliant. Mark, thank you so much. If I had a magic wand, I'd compel you to stay for another half an hour and carry on asking you tricky questions, because the answers have been terrific. Thank you so much for your time. Listeners, thanks for your questions. I hope we got round to answering some of them, not all of them, but thank you so much for your time. I hope the rest of the session is good. So in 15 minutes, energy efficiency in the audio-visual production. Do join us again for that. But for now, thank you all to panelists. Remy, thanks for making this happen. And if any of you are at COP, shout loudly, make things happen, and good luck with all that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.